Well, US President Barack Obama and his Afghan counterpart Hamid Karzai have just signed a deal that could see American troops stay in Afghanistan beyond the 2014 deadline. To discuss the controversial agreement, we're joined by Phyllis Bennis from the Institute for Policy Studies in Texas. Ms. Bennis, welcome. First of all, how clear is this deal? I mean, how much do we know about it and its details?
We don't know a lot of the details yet. The overall plan has been in the works for quite some time, and there was a great deal of pressure in Washington to get it set and signed before the NATO meeting in just a couple of weeks in Chicago, where NATO foreign ministers and heads of state will be meeting to talk about continuing NATO's role in the war in Afghanistan. So what we know is that the agreement will allow the U.S. to keep troops in Afghanistan after what they call the combat troops, which would be the majority of the U.S. troops that are there, are withdrawn. The problem is we don't know yet, and I don't think that the agreement even has decided yet how many troops that will include. The U.S. has talked about numbers up to 20,000 U.S. troops that would remain stationed in Afghanistan after 2014, when the so-called combat troops are supposed to be pulled out.
And so, Ms. Bennis, what do you think will become of the Afghan situation in terms of U.S. foreign policy towards Afghanistan with regards to the fact that it's election year in the United States?
Well, there's no question that election considerations are at work here. And the Obama administration has been very keen to be able to tell the American people in the context of the election that he is winding down the role of the U.S. in Afghanistan, that he's winding down the war, that he's moving towards ending it as he ended the war in Iraq. Of course, the war in Iraq is not over. There are still somewhere around 16,000 U.S. paid mercenaries in Iraq. But it is true that the U.S. soldiers are out. The Obama administration has been very keen to be able to brag about moving towards ending the Afghanistan war at the same time, but he has to do that in a way that convinces the Afghan leadership, particularly President Karzai, who is very much dependent on U.S. funding and U.S. arms, that ending the war, quote, will not mean ending U.S. support for that government in Afghanistan. It's not at all clear that the Karzai government could remain in power without massive U.S. support. So that was the tricky arrangement that the Obama administration had to work out in this signing, in this agreement. He had to be able to say that, as Obama said, that the agreement paves the way for, quote, a future of peace and allows the U.S. to, quote, wind down the war, while still going forward with allowing unnamed, unnumbered numbers of U.S. troops to remain, perhaps for 10 years after 2014, perhaps indefinitely. So this is really not a recipe for ending the war. It's a recipe for winding down the war. One of the things that makes it very complicated is that apparently the agreement says that the U.S. troops that remain in Afghanistan after 2014 would have two roles. One would be training of the Afghan military, and the other would be special forces troops to go after al-Qaeda. The problem with that is that the U.S. military and intelligence agencies all agree that there's somewhere less than 100 al-Qaeda members left in Afghanistan. There's virtually no one there. So the question is, what are those special forces going to do? Are they actually going to be used to go up against the Taliban? And they don't want to say that because they are trying right now to get the Taliban to negotiate? Or is there something else at work? The idea that they would keep thousands of special forces troops in Afghanistan to go up against an enemy that they admit does not exist there has to make us very suspicious.
Indeed. Well, we'll leave it there. Many thanks to Phyllis Bennis, Institute for Policy Studies from Texas.